Hello everyone, Miss Wood here for our last lesson in the evolution unit. Today we are going to be looking at more evidence for the theory of evolution. Remember, last time we looked at fossils, and today we're going to be looking at the biological evidence for this theory. So, in science, the name of the game is always, show me the evidence. Whether it's a hypothesis, a theory, there needs to be solid, sound evidence behind it. And so the theory of evolution doesn't just have fossils or paleontology as a line of evidence. There's also lots of other types of evidence. We've got embryology that we're going to talk about today, anatomy, geographic distribution, and biochemistry. So there is a lot of evidence for the theory of evolution rooted in different disciplines of science and in biology. So here we've got a graphic of whale evolution. Our whale ancestor is up here at the top. So you can see our whale, this is going back to our evidence found in fossils, in the fossil record. And you can see our whale ancestor was once, a land-living mammal. You can see then, it kind of transitioned to things that could live on land and in the water. And then now, our modern whales are fully aquatic. You can see them here down at the bottom. All right, so let's start going through the lines of evidence for evolution. So our first discipline of biology or of science that we're going to be talking about is embryology. So embryology is the study of embryos. And so early embryos of vertebrates, so remember a vertebrate is an animal with a backbone, they look very similar. So you can see here we've got a mammal embryo, or a mammal is going to have a backbone. It's going to be a vertebrate. And we also have a bird embryo, and you can even, you can really see its backbone here in the bird, and then here is the backbone in the mammal. And these embryos, when you look at them, they are very similar. They've got similar, here's the head, bump. You can see that that bump is the same. They've got these pharyngeal pouches. They both have tails. It's like deja vu. They look very similar. And this is because similar groups of embryonic cells develop in the same order and in the same patterns. So this is rooted in their cells, rooted in their DNA, that these embryos develop this way. And that is because this pattern was inherited from the same ancestor that they share. So mammals and birds, we're vertebrates. We've got these vertebrae. We have an ancestor way back that at one point we shared before our lineages split and went their separate ways. All right. So now let's move to anatomy, another discipline. Here we're looking at the physical structures in bodies. That's what we're talking about when we're looking at anatomy. So first we're going to start with homologous structures. So this word has the root homo in it. Homo means same, all right? So these are body parts with the same basic structure but different functions, all right? So homo, same. So same structure, but they do different jobs. So here you can see when we look at the bones, remember, look at the anatomy, their physical body, you can see that we've got this, white bone up here, okay? And you can see that all three, the human, the cat, the whale, they've got this bone, all right? The humerus, all right? Then if I take a look at this, orangish and then tan bones, the radius and ulna, they all have that same pattern. You can see we've got the wrist bones, yellow, same, and then the phalanges or the finger bones. This same pattern is repeated in these organisms. Now, does it look exactly the same? No, those bones are all specialized, but the pattern is the same. So we've got the same basic structure, but different jobs, because a human uses their hands differently than a cat, right? A cat physically walks on their hands, or how we use, we call them hands. And a whale has flippers to swim with that same appendage. All right, now let's move on to analogous structures. Analogous, all right? So analogous, this is body parts with the same function but different structure. So it's the opposite of homo, all right? So they have the same function, so they do the same thing, but they're made differently. So here we've got a bird wing and a butterfly wing. Their function, their job is the same. They're used to fly, right? But when you get down to it and you look at the structure, totally different. The bird's got, bones in its wings, whereas the butterfly wing does not. All right. And then the last anatomical structure we're going to talk about is vestigial structures. Vestigial. So vestigial structures are underdeveloped or unused body parts that had a function in an early ancestor. So this body part worked in the ancestor, and it's been passed on through, the species, and now it doesn't have a job. So here you can see we've got a snake, and the snake ancestor had hind legs or back legs. But, modern snakes today, they don't walk on legs, they slither, right? And so there are these tiny reduced hind limbs, you can see our little purple structures there, that in the ancestor used to be legs. But over time, as they are not useful to a snake, they've gotten smaller, more reduced over time, and now they're just there. They don't do anything. An example of that in us humans is our tailbone, right? We do not have tails, but we still have tail bones. Our ancestor way, way back had a tail, but we do not. However, we still carry that piece of evidence, that we had an ancestor that had a tail. Another example in humans is our appendix, right? We don't use our appendix, but our ancestors, that was really necessary for their digestion. In us, now it's become so small and, reduced. It doesn't have a job. It doesn't have a function. And if anything, it can actually cause us trouble. It can cause us problems if it gets infected and ruptures. All right, so now let's move on to the next line of evidence for evolution, and that is geographic distribution. So this is, the physical locations of species. So we know that evolution is linked with climate and geological forces, so plate tectonics, affects where these species are. And, this helps, these two things help explain many ancestral relationships and the geographic distribution, so where organisms are. So let's, throw back to Darwin. Remember, we talked about, that he observed some tortoises, and, he went to these different islands in the Galapagos, or that's his spot, right? Where he made some great observations. And you can see that these tortoises are all slightly different. Some of them have long necks, short necks. And he realized that this was based on the climate, whether the island had lots of rain and lots of, lush plants, or instead maybe didn't rain as much and had plants that grew higher. That affected what tortoises live there. He saw a relationship there. And so he realized that, animals from the mainland, from South America, must have made their way to the Galapagos and then moved to each island. And on each island, just like these tortoises, there was different environments, different conditions that favored specific traits. And then over time, those traits became, really well established in the different populations on the island. And then, remember, if we put them back together and they can't breed, they're a new species. Or if they're so genetically different, they're a new species. So here we've got our three different tortoise species. Over time, from the start, we had a species that came over from South America. It got onto one of these islands, and slowly, you know, the species moved to the different islands, but over time, you know, while they were, in these islands, they become different based on the climate and the conditions that are there. All right, so here's another line of evidence for the theory of evolution, and that's biochemistry, all right? And so when we're talking about biochemistry, we are talking about the DNA of organisms. And so organisms that are closely related have similar DNA or similar strands or sequences of their DNA. And so here we've got humpback whale strand of DNA, and we've got a hippopotamus strand of DNA. And these are the individual bases or code letters in that DNA. And you can see that, you know, this first triplet here, these first three, there's only one difference. Here you can see when we look at this next grouping, no differences. Again, no differences. And one difference. So there's only two differences between these, you know, strands of DNA. And so from this evidence, you know, we're able to, and some other evidence as well, physical evidence, their anatomy, we're able to, you know that the closest land relative of modern whales is actually a hippopotamus. So they're the most closely related animals in terms of, you know, from the whale, you know, reaching back. So they share an ancestor. The hippopotamus and the humpback whale. All right, so that kind of leads me to this vocabulary word, common ancestor, or common, we say common means shared, an ancestor, this is a species that others descended from. So we were just saying that whale and that hippopotamus have a common ancestor, an ancestor that they are both related to before their lines split off and went their separate ways. Here we've got a wolf. So the wolf is the common ancestor of, you know, all dogs. Our wolf is, the wolf ancestor you know, is humans bred these different breeds of dogs. And so the shared ancestor, you know, of all dog breeds is going to be the wolf. All right, so we went through a lot of lines of evidence for evolution today, and good luck studying for our exam.